Okay, so this talk is about community building. Obviously, it's from the viewpoint of HSF training, but I think it applies to almost any kind of community building that you might want to do. And I will start with this very simple formula about engagement. Of course, engagement is equivalent to kind of what your community does, and being made of intrinsic motivation plus extrinsic motivation, and then plus support minus obstacles. So I first found that on Dan Katz's slide, and he took it from Pacelli. I think there's one more component that I would personally add to that, and that's advertisement. And I will come to this later on. And obviously, this is not meant to be a really scientific formula, even though we might try to amend that by perhaps for the more pedantic of us, making at least sure that it's positive, because no matter how overwhelming the obstacles might look, it's really unlikely that someone will do negative engagement. In any case, this whole talk doesn't try to look at this in a neutral scientific way, but rather we will directly try this out. So I will walk through each of these lines, and I will try to push your emotional or perhaps rational buttons and make you join our training efforts. And then in the end, you can tell me if that worked for you or how we can improve. So with this being said, let's start perhaps with the pure hardest motivation, which is intrinsic motivation. And so assuming that most of us really want to advance HEP and want to have a high impact, I think that at the moment, training might actually be your most effective choice. And to illustrate that, we can look at this back of the envelope calculation, where you write a lesson on something of your choice. Your framework packs something really common like NumPy or PyRoot, and you invest a certain amount of time, let's say 30 hours for a 3-hour lesson. I think that's realistic. And students using this lesson of yours manage to cut down their learning time from perhaps 6 hours to 3 hours. So that was halved. And then if you have around 100 students, which are around 2 of our events per year, you save 300 hours to the HEP community. So you have a 10 times payback per year. So obviously this calculation really depends on the details. So for example, I think there's even better ramification if you're instilling best practices, because it's rather simple to encourage students to use unit testing or show them how that's done. But it can really make the difference between a working or a failing experiment, a retracted or a successful paper. And similarly, if you really focus on badly documented or very difficult topics, really get this ratio of studying time with or without your lesson, you can really max that up. Whereas if you, as mentioned here, focus on NumPy, then perhaps there's already really nice resources out there. So it really depends on what you're doing. But I think if you do it right, and you do it in a sustainable and scalable way, like Sam outlined, you can really have a large impact. So let me just put this on a big slide. I think you can have a really high impact and really advanced HEP through training. It might be the most effective choice. Obviously, this will change if training gets more and more popular, but currently there's just disproportionate efforts. So lots of time spent developing software and very little time spent teaching software. So let's go to extrinsic motivation. So first thing, and perhaps that's still to be considered intrinsic motivation, is that you can use training to deepen your own understanding. If you can't explain something to a freshman, you haven't understood it yourself. And of course, you can use that to force yourself to learn something new and useful. And if you're new to it, you can also practice collaborative workflow, GitHub, and so on. It's also an opportunity for cross-experiment networking, because you join a vibrant community and really work together there, which is, well, kind of rare, I think. And so the first 3 bullet points on the slides are something that we can advertise, but we can't really change how effective it is. But this community aspect is something that we can try to improve as much as possible as HSF training group. So one thing that we did with respect to that is adding these floating heads to our HSF webpage. And anyone who contributes to training can add their profile, which then links to social media, and you can include a small text about yourself as well. So this kind of really shows that we're one community and work together on one goal. It also ties in nicely with, I think, one of the biggest and extrinsic motivations, like it or not, and that's recognition. And that's really notoriously hard for training. And at least one thing you can do is in your application, you can link to your community profile, you can show you're a part of HSF training, perhaps outline in this profile what you did there. It's better than nothing. And we also tried to improve this further and really tie it to the module that you're contributing to by crediting the content contributors of each of the modules separately. And for that, it first sounds like a lot of work, but luckily there's this so-called all contributor GitHub bot, which is mostly used to update READMEs on GitHub with all the contributors. But we configured it to also work for our web pages. And it offers a very simple way to add avatars and names to our modules with everyone who contributes to them. So to show this workflow, all you need to do, starting on the left, in any kind of GitHub issue or merge request or anything where you can write, you just call on this all contributors bot, please add name for example, code. And then the bot will by itself open a pull request, tell you about it, accept the pull request, and then magically the picture and the name of the person will appear on our web page and in our README. That really is a nice visual way to ensure that the authors don't get overlooked, and at least everyone who's doing the training can see them and perhaps recognize them and thank them in the real life. So for something completely different, which I think is also extrinsic motivation, you might not actually have the choice whether you want to teach or not. You might be a supervisor to your students, you might already have to do training. And although this is a somewhat polemic comparison, a lot of people are, I think, doing what's shown on the left, which is, for example, giving out the same instructions to every student every time, rather than making some kind of training document. Or they use slides that only work if they explain them verbally, step by step. And that leads to having to answer the same questions over and over. And invariably, the material will age and will become deprecated because they are the only and overworked maintainer of it. Whereas what we want to push is to go for these training modules, which are self-contained and they are self-study centric. And they also allow you to really roll out events with our support very easily. One of the biggest nice things about them as well is that anyone with a GitHub account can help to improve and maintain the material. So this avoids this material from aging. And of course, you won't have any issues with finding a big audience with our combined mailing lists, I think. So then perhaps kind of the biggest motivation that governs our capitalistic world, being money. And this is a thing that we haven't tried yet, but there's this idea out there that we might repurpose travel funds as an enticement to create training and material and to teach, because it just takes a lot of time. So it's really nice to compensate for that. So Sam made a really nice pitch. If you're interested, yeah, he already linked to the Google document in the chat. The idea for teaching is that there's something like a $2,000 fellowship for a 3 to 4 hour training module, perhaps, and you get $1,000 at the beginning and then $1,000 on successful delivery, which has to be judged by some committee, for example, someone from HSF training and from Iris HAP or the fund provider. So this is something we're working on. It's not ready yet. But of course, this kind of goes in the way of the long-term goal of creating a career path for for someone who's really putting in a lot of work into teaching software in an HTTP community. So finally, support minus obstacles. So there's different kinds of obstacles. There's the technical aspects. So if you want to create scalable and sustainable training, you have to find out a way to do that where everyone can kind of chip in and try to improve it. So for us, these training modules are websites, but you only need to write in Markdown, which I think everyone can do. And we will help you to set up the framework, and we also provide tech support. So you can really focus on the training content. Especially with events, there's also organizational aspects, and we try to already help you by providing some how-tos, how to organize a training event, for example. And we then also offer to find mentors for you to help out to really get that 5-to-1 ratio that Sam highlighted, and we help you to find an audience. A big problem, of course, is inertia, and I think related to that, lack of confidence, perhaps, because especially organizing an event for the first time can feel a bit daunting at first. And what you want to signal is to everyone who's trying that they are not alone. So we have our weekly round tables, and we're doing this as a community. So we have their back, so to speak. We're also on Mattermost, so to answer questions asynchronously. And perhaps the biggest obstacle of them all, if it's hard to find time for training, what we will try out towards the end of December is to have this hackathon. And I will come to this again later. So looking back at this formula, we now covered the first 3 lines. The one which is still left is advertisement. And to motivate why I included that, I think the whole issue is that if there's no advertisement, then people don't really have that extrinsic motivation or pressure, and they don't know about our support. So for them, this whole formula only looks like this. And obstacles can at least appear large. They might also appear larger without us telling you how efficient you can be. So this really drastically shrinks the power of the community. So I do think advertisement is really important, especially because it also factors in with these terms that just vanished. So, and this is also where you really come in. In order for HSF training to work, we really need to spread the word about it. So that means to the training working groups of your experiments, or to colleagues who might have an interest in teaching, already have to teach, and also to students you supervise who might just be interested in our events for learning themselves. And what seems to work very well is to start on a low commitment base. So you just say, hey, they teach you how to use Docker and it's free, so why don't you join? Or similarly, you might market to someone who's teaching and still looking for tutors. Hey, these people might find you tutors. And of course, during our events, we advertise our mission, link to the webpage, and so on. But most importantly, we follow up with people later. So in the survey, we collect emails of participants who are interested in contributing, and then reach out to them again. And this is really where kind of an HSF training journey starts there, where students become mentors, and then mentors become instructors or facilitators. Or might even skip that and directly become instructors from being students. And to make this a bit more palpable, so this is one slide, or case study if you want, from Marin, who kind of did the whole thing. He joined us as a student in the awesome workshop. And in the survey, he said, yes, I could consider helping you in further events. And then he was asked in the last minute if he wants to join as a mentor in the virtual pipeline training. He did that, then went on to also mentor in the virtual Docker training. He also started to help out with the surveys, which is more administrative. Joined our weekly meetings because he heard someone was interested in delivering a machine learning workshop, and then went on to, well, become an instructor, improve the material, and perhaps you might even add facilitator because the event just took place a couple of weeks before. So this seems to work. So finally, and there's kind of a jump and more ties into the obstacles minus support part of it. If any of these reasons here, be them intrinsic or extrinsic, convinced you, but and you really want to teach perhaps this one thing or make sure that everyone does this thing right, we, for the first time, organize a hackathon, which is 3 days of work, 16th to 18th December, where we just sit together and we might try to make your module kind of become reality. So there's the Indico link here. There's more motivation on the Indico page, and it should probably answer most of your questions. If any of these questions remain, please reach out to us. So it really can serve as your excuse to block off 3 days and really focus on making this thing come true. Because as we know, it's kind of hard to find time in between your other responsibilities. So to wrap it up, I just want to repeat the most important sentence, I think, that training can really have a high impact and can really advance the HTTP community, right now at least. And as discussion points, let me just bring up this formula again. And I'm eager to hear your comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Who has questions or offers of sponsorship, perhaps? I guess I had one about the virtual hackathon. How do you see dealing with time zones? In the sense that there's very little sort of overlap in the usual days. You see just having sort of afternoon. Yeah, go ahead.
So there will be some kind of kickoff where we will discuss about possible modules and so on. But if you already know what you're doing, I mean, it just kind of tries to give you that workshop kind of feeling. But in the end, we sit together and work and try to make this come alive. So time zones shouldn't matter too much, even though it's formally in the European time zone.
Thanks. I thought I saw a hand fly by, but I don't see it anymore. So,
David, this is Michel. I cannot raise my
Michel.
hand because I am a host. I had a very miscellaneous question. Looking at the training page on the HSF website, I don't see mentioned the video that are available on YouTube. So is it intentional? Is it just that I misread the things, or maybe this is more for Sam than for you?
Sorry, I had a bit of trouble hearing somehow this audio setup is.
Yeah, so if you, I mean, we don't highlight that on the main page, but if you go to the curriculum,
okay.
Then there's little icons, and one of them should look like a little.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sebastian, do you have a question?
There is one from Sebastian, I think.
Right. Yeah. No, I just wanted to thank Killian for this presentation and for highlighting very well, the motivations, but also the obstacles and trying to motivate people to do that. And I fully support you on that. I was just wondering one last question on this hackathon event that you mentioned for December. Okay, no, but now I see that you have some modules in mind, particular modules that you would like to develop. Is it a fixed list, or other people can come with other ideas of training?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we kind of try to focus on this curriculum of ours, but in the end, you can also just use it as an excuse to work on your way of training people, right? So I don't think we are too exclusive. Obviously, these modules are our main focus, and we try to recast things as modules because they really seem to work for us. But we are, I think, very open for other ideas, and
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean, I might also add, like, part of the reason that we'd like to do that is that if you come with your own idea, then there may be a complementary idea, and they may sort of, Vulcan mind meld into the more effective training. And so I know that myself, TJ, and someone else were talking about basically like testing and grid computing, and you could imagine an optimization of your code before you submit it to the grid, and you could imagine having like 2 or 3 modules that can stand alone but really fit coherently into this idea of like best practices for using distributed resources. And that idea originated from the 3 of us coming from different points and then discussing on Skype once. So I think that we have our little wish list, but if you have an idea, then bring it and we'll discuss, and maybe it can be, sort of, modified or shifted to kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Okay, I see. Thanks a lot.
Heather, I see you now.
Yeah. So I think it's really great what you guys were doing, and so this isn't meant to take away from that in any way. But one thing I'm kind of wondering about is how, if you've considered any interaction with what goes on at the universities, because in some sense the way this is kind of presented is that there are kind of holes in the standard university curriculum. And I wonder if there could be some sort of engagement in trying to patch this versus us adding additional things on top of what's done there.
Yeah, that's a very valuable point. So I guess that goes into both directions, right? Universities would probably be happy to have ready-made training content to use in their courses, and and on the other hand, if universities also already have some training material that we can profit from, that's nice for us too. So definitely a good point. We should kind of have more collaboration between them, I guess.
Yeah, I think that I totally agree, and I think that there's going to be a Snowmass project on this that Sud here is organizing, which is going to more reach out to universities. Being not a faculty myself, it's different. I've always wondered how physics departments actually think about their computing requirements, because when I was a student, they just were extremely slim, and it seems like it's non-uniform to a very high degree. So yeah, we haven't thought about it much, but I think that this is something that is being thought about more coherently in Snowmass. I don't know if
Looks like that. It looks like that question raised a lot of comments. Sudhir, since you were mentioned already, why don't I pick you first?
Thanks, David, for picking me up out of the priority. Anyway, Heather's question is very pertinent, and I think it's very something that we need to address. Remember, all the software we do is for research, so it's not something that's taught at universities. But since we have this HSF training program, then maybe some of it can trickle down to some physics department in our field who would like to do these activities as part of some credit students can get at universities. So in fact, like C++ course that was mentioned by Samuel, some students were asking if they can get some credit for it. But I think this is the niche we are trying to fill, and it'll be wonderful if we can push it down to university curriculum. But we don't have any power for that. But it's something we wish we could do. Thank you.
Eduardo.
Hi, Killian. So clearly you folks are having a big impact Right, it's really very nice to see all that you have been doing. My tricky question, which I'm sure everybody will be interested in, is how, if at all, you're going to quantify the success and the impact that you're having. This is really tricky, I think, but quite an interesting one to think about as well.
Well, so my approach, and perhaps it's a flawed one, was kind of this back of the envelope calculation. We roughly know how many people are at our events, and we might get some estimate of how much time it actually saved them, or but of course in the end this question is kind of hard to answer, right? You cannot quantify what would happen if they didn't attend your workshop. If they did not attend your workshop on unit testing, would they not use unit testing, or would they discover by themselves?
Sure.
Hard to tell.
No. Yeah, I guess it connects maybe a little bit with some recognition as well, and eventually even citations of the. We mentioned this earlier in the workshop, right? Some kind of way of citing the material that is being used as well, even if it's in some documents. It's not necessarily in a publication, but in some way. I don't have an answer. It really is out of interest, because it should be appreciated, right? So that's my point.
Yeah, good point.
Kevin.
Yeah, so I wanted to just briefly comment on Heather's question and also what Sudhir brought up. I think Sam partially covered it, but I've made this comment at every HSF workshop, and I don't want to lose the streak. So in my experience in the university physics departments, typically the CS requirements are seen as not very important. And I think that this is largely because, especially in historical times, a lot of physics was somebody doing something at their lab desk, trying to make a new material or what have you. And so the computing was seen as something that was sort of superfluous or got in the way. And obviously nowadays, when we have huge data sets and things like that, the only way to interact with them is by computing. But I think that perspective is still sort of trickling down slowly to physics departments. Now, hopefully that's improved since the time that I was actually taking those courses. But I think that while HSF may not have clouds itself to go around and tell physics departments this is important, a lot of people here are tenured professors in their physics departments. And I think, a sort of a more distributed outreach effort could really pay off.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Ben.
Yes, just really to echo that. I mean, sort of going maybe giving a slightly UK specific perspective. There's often in the Midlands, for example, we have this so-called Midlands Physics Alliance graduate school, and the HEP group at Warwick was actually tapped to give a C++ course. So we had to develop that. But of course, if we had been able to say, look, here's a great course already that's ready to go from HSF. We could have either taken that and presented it, and the students would get credit for that. And similarly for things like Python or other computing things. So I think there's definitely a market for this, and I think it's probably just on all of us in our departments to sort of maybe sort of sell the courses that come up as, when people say, oh, well, we need a Python course or this, we can say, oh, okay, here's one over here that you could take. So I think it's maybe just a sort of marketing and sales as much as anything else.
Well, sometimes there's a bit of resistance because some people are also being, paid to make up their own course, right? So
yes, I guess it's whether it's the payment is for developing the course or for presenting it. Yeah. But yes, it's a good point.
So, Jared, did you have another point?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to mention briefly that the category is training and career and not just training. But obviously, what was mentioned that how to sort of gauge the success of people taking our course, it is hard to define. So one statistic is people attending it. I'm sure they attend it because they want to gain something out of it. But I think that it would be nice to have some measure of success that can be quantized besides the number of people attending. But I guess if they embark onto some careers, then that can also be a measure of success, and I would say.
I mean, maybe one thing that we've thought about, and I know that I think whenever I say this, people are like, oh yeah, we should do that, is we do these before and after surveys, but we don't do a survey 6 months out. And 6 months out from a training, it's possible to ask the question, did you have a publication since the training in which you used one thing that you learned in the training, and then have them identify what that one thing was. I mean, I think that that would be a possible thing to do. And so one thing we wanted to do is always send out this, like, follow-up survey again. It's just that anybody that's done surveys knows that they're just like a lot of herding cats. So that's just, daunting.
Gordon.
Excuse me. Yeah, thank you, David. Great talk, Killian. I just wanted to address a couple of the comments that have recently come up. One from the point of view of university programs and starting to feed this back into university programs. Be aware that different types of the different sub-disciplines of physics have different computing needs, but they basically all have computing needs. So I think something that gets crafted for a physics department looks a little different than what we're talking here. Much of the training that we talk here, especially when we get to the higher level, is more like taking one of the upper division, courses that's sort of aimed towards particle physics. And a place where physics departments are still struggling is to get the basic intro version of the programming. However, I think most physics departments recognize this as a problem, and there are many, many attempts now to weave it through the program. So I think that's a problem that is effectively solving itself right now. The second thing is trying to understand the efficacy. There's actually huge bodies of research by people who get paid in both author credits and tenure and other things, trying to understand how the students are learning or teaching, and then improving the teaching. I would suggest maybe doing some at least cursory reading of reviews